Good evening, everyone. Uday, Bhaskar here again. Thank you for being here this evening. At the IIC, when there are so many events, multiple events, one is not quite sure about whether or not we get the critical mass. But we are very glad that all of you are here. This is a subject that I think has been animating all of us in different ways. And even as we speak, the news from West Asia is very, very tragic and discouraging. But I won't get into the subject itself. I have a very limited function here today. One is to welcome all of you on behalf of the India International Center, to request you to put your phones on silent. And an additional request, if I may, that there is a certain sanctity and gravitas about a public lecture of this type. IIC tries very hard to provide a platform to sustain and nurture this kind of an activity in the public space. And Professor Palat has conveyed to us that he would speak precisely for 61 minutes. He's a historian. And my request to you is that in that 61 minutes, please don't leave the room. If you must, and I mean this very seriously, I think it's unfair to a speaker. If you have to, for any reason, you can time yourself, then please sit in such a manner that your exit is unobtrusive, if it's possible. But otherwise, my very earnest request to you is, please stay through for 61 minutes for the main lecture. After that, the chair will allow a shuffle. And unless you are trying to do a live social media feed, which we don't necessarily want, this is a historian subject, try not to look at your phones. But again, these are all very earnest requests. On that note, my limited role this evening is to introduce our chair, Ambassador Shivshankar Menon. He's really literally one of those persons who does not need an introduction. Former Foreign Secretary, former National Security Advisor, currently visiting professor at the Ashoka University, and also the chair there of the China Studies Department. So I'll leave it at that and request Shankar to steer this. Shankar?
Thank you. Thank you, Uday, and welcome everyone. Good to see such a solid turnout. I assume it's both the subject and the speaker. He's speaking on the historical origins of the Palestine war, and the speaker, who it's my pleasure to introduce, is, I think, well known to all of us. He's a historian and an unusual Indian historian who has worked on, Russian history, world history, geopolitics, Indian nationalism, managed to do a job that we never thought would be finished, which is the selected works of Jawaharlal Nehru between 2011 and he was visiting professor of Imperial Russian history at the University of Chicago. I mean, the list is very long. If I do this, he won't never get his 61 minutes. So, I think the best name I've heard for him was when we were in college, briefly together. He was head of the Fine Arts Society, so he's known as Phenomenon, and which he really is as a historian. So today, I won't stand in your way. I'd ask him to come and speak to you. And after that, maybe we'll open it up to questions and to a discussion. All yours, Madhavan.
You want your water there?
No, I want a clock.
There's a clock there.
That's all right. Thank you very much, Chairman, and Uday for organizing this. I'm delighted that we are able to discuss this, a very painful subject indeed in our world now, but all the more reason we have to discuss it as well as we can. But I'm now discussing only the historical origins of it, as I've said in the title. Not what is happening right now in Palestine, that we're reading in the newspapers every day, so I do not have to discuss it with you. I know only about it as much as anybody else does. So, and we leave it at that. But I want to ask the question, how is it that a war of this kind has come about? And the war of this kind is that it is so asymmetrical that you have the whole of the Western world, with Israel as a strike arm, attacking a people who have no state at all. No state, no resources, no finances, besieged for the past so many years, decades, by Israel. To get out of the country, they have to pass through checkpoints and endless humiliations there. And perpetually under attack, one form of slaughter or the other, be it a series of intifadas or lesser conflicts. But you have a situation where the most developed part of the world, collectively, that is America plus all its satellites, European and otherwise, have all come to attack through Israel, this one little place. And how extraordinarily heroically the Palestinians are able to fight back, and have been continuing to do so for more than a century, despite every effort at the obituary being written that they will not be able to do so, they have to disappear from the map altogether. Now, how did such a war occur? How did such a war situation develop is the question. And I must go back to before the First World War, to the three principal players, the Zionists, the imperial powers, namely British, mainly British, but also some of the other Europeans, and the Palestinians and the Arabs behind them, or rather, in fact, not behind them at all, not supporting them in any way. The Palestinians are so isolated. They're isolated even from the Arabs, who have not supported them. So how is this possible, despite them being Arab and this being planted in the middle of the Arab world? Now, the Zionist argument for having the state of Israel in Palestine, started rather early from the 1880s or beyond, and was formalized by Theodor Herzl, as you know, in the late 1890s. And their idea was, first of all, they defined a nationalism called Zionism, which is to have a national homeland for the Jews in Palestine. That is what Zionism is. It is not just a Jewish nationalism, but a Jewish nationalism to have a homeland in Palestine. And the main theorists of that time were Theodor Herzl, Vladimir Jabotinsky, the extreme right-wing one, whose intellectual or political descendants are now people like Menachem Begin and Benjamin Netanyahu and company, and David Ben-Gurion. These are all the theorists, along with Nahum Goldman. So very distinguished, able theorists, very energetic and very effective in organizing the Zionist movement and putting across their ideology and their strategies. And the principal argument for them to claim that we need a national homeland, a Jewish homeland in Palestine, and therefore eventually a Jewish nation and a state, is that Jews are not safe anywhere in Europe. They are a minority everywhere, they're constantly being persecuted, and the persecution is mounting year by year. And therefore the only recourse to them is to find a territory where they can become a majority, an absolute majority, and have a sovereign state, which they can call their own. Thereafter they are safe, and nobody can trouble them the way they are being troubled here. Now, this is an extraordinary situation that had developed in Europe in the 19th century. Their argument was perfectly justified, that they were a persecuted minority indeed, and the minority and the persecution was growing every year. But there's an irony to it. They're also emancipated in the course of the 19th century after the French Revolution. They came out of the ghetto, and their emancipation was seen in the spectacular careers of the Jewish intellectuals in the universities, in the world of arts and sciences, in the revolutionary movements, and in high finance. In all these areas, the Jews flourished extremely well, except, of course, they did not go into state service because they're not allowed to go there, and they were not landholders, again, because they're not allowed there. But in everything else, they flourished. So on the one hand, there's a great emancipation that was taking place throughout the 19th century and into the 20th century until they got the state of Israel itself. That is the ultimate emancipation. But At the same time, anti-Semitism was mounting uncontrollably in Europe, and went on and reached the paroxysm that we know in the 1930s and 40s, when they suffered the greatest possible disaster in their history, the Holocaust. The two go together. Now, Theodor Herzl's and Jabotinsky's and arguments and so on, where they say that they are not safe anywhere, is perfectly valid. They weren't. But the next step was to demand a territory where they will be sovereign majority and the state will be sovereign, was the most problematic. They knew it would be extremely problematic. And this is where they made the point. They said, we have to find a land which is empty, which can take us. Now, where do you find a piece of land which is empty? The whole world had been divided by colonial conquest in the course of the 19th century. There's no such thing as an empty land anywhere, even if it is sparsely populated. And all the places that they canvassed, people like Jabotinsky and so on recited the whole list. Places like Argentina, Western Australia. The government of Australia actually considered that possibility, that they can give a piece of land there. That is to protect themselves from the Japanese possible invasion, and so on. Finally, the argument was that nobody can give away a piece of land to create a sovereign state there, under any circumstances. If you have already a sovereign state, you're not going to give it away to somebody else to be a sovereign state. So it has to be obviously found somewhere whose land can be grabbed, to put it quite summarily, which is under colonial rule in some way. That's the only way a land can be found. And that was Palestine. Here a double argument was made. They said, first of all, it is our ancient territory, namely our ancient homeland, from which we were driven out by the Romans in the 1st and 2nd centuries AD, and therefore we are just coming back to it, and we have a right to it. We are entitled to it. Now that argument is extraordinary and can be dismissed out of hand, because it means that we must reverse all migrations in world history if that is to be accepted. But it's no use making a rational argument to those who make this kind of an argument. This is a piece of religious dogma, in fact, that comes from the Zionist side. But the other point was that this is an empty piece of land. And the slogan was an empty land for people without a homeland. A territory for people without a homeland. The Jews had no home, here was an empty land. Now that was a blatant falsehood in itself, because there were Palestinians there. They said it is empty, and then in typical colonial fashion, people like Ben Gurion and Jabotinsky would say, it is empty except for, it is uninhabited except by some natives. That is the expression. I'm quoting them. Well, I was just thinking that you remember India used to be called native. We're all natives. And I suppose in those times that India was uninhabited except for 400 million natives. So I don't know why they didn't pick up India. It is a rather larger and more comfortable place to have gone into. But this was the argument they made, and it carried very far. It has been so consistently applied that until the 1970s at least, it was always claimed. This is actually empty land. There are only a few Bedouins wandering around, doing nothing very much. And it was all sand. And the desert bloomed because of Israeli ingenuity, finances, skills, and all the rest. And they created a new country out of a place where the Arabs could not do anything. But to say that it is empty and therefore can be occupied is as valid as saying that any country which has some spare land can be occupied. But there's an argument that comes up periodically, by the way. We need not dismiss it out of hand. Americans, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, advanced the theory that Siberia is unpopulated or underpopulated and cannot be exploited by Russia properly. And therefore, it should be taken over by the Western economies for proper exploitation. And they even trace the backwardness of the Soviet Union and of the Russian Empire to the fact that they held Siberia and were not able to exploit it properly. Therefore, this is a place that is ripe for being taken over. So there are many places in the world which are underpopulated in this way and can be taken over by this logic. And I suppose the whole of northern Canada can also be, if Siberia can be. And I'm sure there are many other places in the world which are deserts and empty lands of this sort. The concept of underpopulation can never be precisely defined by any means. We just need to think that India had a population in 1950 of 357 million, And we were always told that India is overpopulated, and that was a common discourse until the 1970s or so. Well, now we have 1,400 million, and that means we must have been underpopulated at that time if we have accommodated another 1,000 million. So we could have easily taken in the whole of Israel, I'm sure, at that time. Now, all these claims that these are underpopulated lands and nothing to worry about was accompanied by the further statement that if we Jews set up a place here, we'll make the desert bloom and the Arabs will benefit, because after all, we are developing the country and they are the beneficiaries of it. A standard colonial argument, if you recall. However much they made these arguments, they made the opposite also. They knew they were lying through their teeth, as it were. I might put it so strongly. Ben-Gurion had said all this, but now let me read to you what Ben-Gurion said in 1956 to Nahum Goldman. He said, "Why should the Arabs make peace? If I was an Arab leader, I would never make terms with Israel. This is natural. We have taken their country. Sure, God promised it to us, but what does that matter to them?" I must remind you, this is Ben-Gurion saying it, not an Arab or a Palestinian. Our God is not theirs. We come from Israel, it is true, but 2,000 years ago. And what is that to them? There has been anti-Semitism, the Nazis, Hitler, Auschwitz, but was that their fault? They see only one thing. We have come here and stolen their country. Please note, he said stolen their country. Why should they accept that? They may perhaps forget it in 1 or 2 generations, but for the moment, there's no chance. So it's simple. We have to stay strong and maintain a powerful army. Our whole policy is there. Otherwise, the Arabs will wipe us out. There's such clarity of thought there, and such clarity of expression also. Now, in this situation, where you have a land which you are now occupying, whoever is there can never be a majority. They're not allowed to be a majority. They will have to dwindle into a minority. And if they have any difficulties about it, what do you do with it? In the whole of the Zionist argument, there's nothing that they have said what is to be done with the local population there, the Arab population of Palestine. They said, we will look after them. We do not have to worry. We know how to handle minorities. But we ourselves will never be a minority. That was the Zionist statement. So having said that, if there are any problems, if there are resistances and so on, and if there's conflict, the matter is left open. It is left as open as it was with the case of the Jews in the 19th century in Europe and the 20th century. As you know, there's a thing called the Jewish problem in Europe. They used to call it the Jewish problem, the whole problem of anti-Semitism and what to do with them. And again, the issue came up. What do we do with these Jews? And people said, well, we can't throw them into the sea, can we? So what is to be done? Well, we know what is done. There's only they have to follow one of 2 options, or rather both of them. You either deport them somewhere, dump them somewhere or the other. Hitler had suggested Madagascar at one time. Others have suggested various different places like this. Or you exterminate them. In Europe, in the 20th century, they did both. They expelled them in one way to Israel, and they exterminated them, as we know the story of the Second World War, the Holocaust. With the result, there are very few Jews left in Europe, and there's no Jewish problem as a result. And who has a problem? It's the Arabs. They are saddled with the European problem of anti-Semitism. And whenever the term is used, again and again, about anti-Semitism, it is such a loaded term now, as you know from the news nowadays. Anti-Semitism always raises the specter of Auschwitz and the Holocaust and all that it implies. It is not simple prejudice. I can be anti-French or anti-Russian or anti-Chinese. It doesn't mean I'm setting out to exterminate them. In India, we're always anti every other part of India. And the manner in which we express our dislike of each other keeps the country going as a united country. It is well balanced and cancelled out. Now, in the case of the Europeans and the Jews, the hatreds were visceral. They just couldn't, there's no extremes to which they would not go. It is something very specifically European. One part of it, of course, is the ancient medieval charge against the Jews that they had killed Jesus Christ. But that is not the problem in the 19th century. The 19th century is something else. The 19th century was when Europe was nationalizing, when nation after nation were being created. And each nation had to consolidate its culture over one territory. That is what nationalism was. And here were the Jews who were an external element to that particular culture, as each nationalist understood it. The Jews are not part of that culture, as they saw it. So the Jews always belonged nowhere. This is the problem. They said, you don't belong anywhere. And there's no greater sin in nationalist argument than to belong nowhere. You have to be in some territory, you have to have some nation which is yours, otherwise you are not to be tolerated. So the Jews and the Gypsies, or the Roma, are the two people who have no land in Europe, never and always faced persecution on that ground as being suspect, wanderers. The wandering Jew is a famous image of the Jew, as you remember. So, for this reason, the prejudice against them kept mounting, and the persecution of them, and it reaches the frenzied proportions of the 20th century. But that is not what is meant by an ordinary prejudice. Everyone in the world has prejudices and it can express them, but it doesn't mean that. So when we say Arabs are anti-Semitic today, it's a wrong expression. That would be wrongly applied. They're not anti-Semitic. They might be hostile to the Jew, to Israel, to the Jews, etc. And it's in the nature of what we'd call a communal conflict or a national conflict. Nothing more than that. But so, on that point, we must be quite clear. The anti-Semitism is a very specifically European Christian problem. It is not a problem that exists outside that world, that Western world. Now the Zionists had to persuade somebody to support them. How do you get this territory? The strategy had to be worked out. And their strategy was that, look, we cannot do it ourselves. We cannot just walk in there and take over the place and create a nation. Some major imperial power has to be our sponsor. Otherwise, we cannot do it. So it is internal to the Zionist argument, and therefore to the foundation of Israel, that it has to be a colonial project. There's no other way. To deny that Israel is not a colonial settler country is wrong. It is created through a colonial strategy and nothing else. And they went through all the series of candidates. The Ottoman Empire, the Sultan said no. The Russian Empire, Russia said no. German Empire, they said no, we're not sponsoring it. Well, that left only the French and the British. The British said yes, of course. They are the best because they are the largest and they're a global empire, and they endorsed it fully. But they had to carry the argument further to persuade the British properly that this is a project worth undertaking. And here the Zionists were extremely clever and subtle. Note it. They used the innate anti-Semitism of the European conservatives, especially the British conservative upper class, and appealed to that. Jews, Zionists, appealing to the anti-Semitism of the conservative upper class in England to give them a homeland in Palestine. And the argument was that, well, you detest us. You don't want to see us. You don't want us to see any more of us coming in from Russia, immigrants. So just dump us safely in Palestine. The Rwanda argument, in other words. Exactly what Rishi Sunak was trying to do with immigrants in Rwanda. And to the conservatives that appealed. Yes, we do not want to see any more of you here. They were fed up with seeing all the Jews coming in from the Russian Empire and East Europe generally. And so this helped. So the Zionists knew how to pull every string in European politics and every prejudice to get themselves this homeland. But then they appealed to the most important particular British interest, the strategic one, the really strategic one. They said, you need to protect the Suez Canal. You've got only one side of it, Egypt. The other side is exposed, and we never know who is going to come and occupy it. It is prescient, it is very true, the Germans did occupy it. during the First World War. And so they said, what you need is a European bastion set here in the middle of the Arab world to be your safe partner against an unreliable Arab majority and for strategic purposes for the rest of your geopolitical interests. Now that went home, certainly. A European base in the Arab world, which will be safely British, always aligned with the British, and as a part of a colonial project, settle there, and will keep the Arabs under control. As Herzl said, we should there form a rampart of Europe against Asia, an outpost of civilization as opposed to barbarism. Barbarism meant here Muslims. So this was the Zionist argument. This is our land, we'll go and occupy it, somebody will sponsor it, and an imperial power will sponsor it because it is in their strategic interest to do so. But what did the actual imperialists work out as their strategy? How did they go about it? In the first place, within England, there was a well-established tradition already throughout the 19th century of what we'd call Christian Zionism. They were not Jews at all. They were evangelical Christians who in their devoutness believed that the Jews were entitled to return to their holy land and their original homeland, the Promised Land. Even if they disliked the Jews, they said the Jews are entitled to go there. And this movement was led by very influential upper-class English politicians. People of the order of Ashley Cooper, Anthony Ashley Cooper, who happened to be also the Earl of Shaftesbury, who was a great social reformer in same league as William Wilberforce and so on, pushed any number of social reforms in his capacity as minister and whatever else he was. And he said he's the one who first put across this idea that the Jews have the right to get to their homeland. And that was followed up by another famous evangelical Christian, a Christian Zionist, the person we know very well now, Arthur James Balfour, of the Balfour Declaration. He was at one time Prime Minister, then Foreign Secretary at the time of the Balfour Declaration in 1917. So this was now this helped enormously in creating a public acceptance of this possibility, because these are all people of very influential, very upper class, and therefore in the deferential society of that time, it carried enormous amount of weight. And the Jews made full use of it in their lobbying. The principal one being Chaim Weizmann, who was in London doing all the lobbying for them. The other one was, of course, as the Zionists had also already told them, it is good for us to create the homeland because it sorts out our problem of the place being flooded by Jews coming in from East Europe. And that did very well also. The third point, the Suez strategy. This was accepted only finally in the middle of the war, when they found German armies had advanced as far as the Suez Canal through Palestine. And it took Allenby, who was a British general in Egypt, an enormous amount of effort to drive them back. And he finally got them out of Palestine only at the very end of the war. Till then, the Germans were holding out very well. And it was brought home to the British how dangerously exposed was Suez, or what they imagined was dangerously exposed Suez, if it is the other bank was held by the Germans. Well, you have a look at the map, you'll see how it is. Is it Suez? Sorry. Yeah. Suez is not there. Anyway, you know what I mean. And to this, on this point, a very large number of the British political class were fully in agreement that having this place is a great asset to British strategy. All the leaders, be it Winston Churchill or Lord Milner, Leo Amery, William Ormsby Gore, Philip Kerr, even the editor of the Manchester Guardian, C.P. Scott, all of them agreed that this is an invaluable asset to British strategic requirements. And therefore, the Jews are our best friends and they have enormous power. Now, it is curious to note that they believed that the Jews had so much power. The point is, on the one hand, they wanted a Jewish support by creating this Jewish homeland. They wanted Jewish support in all over Europe and in America for the war effort. And Jews, of course, were very influential in many places, from revolutionary movements to banking interests. The Jews were everywhere. So they wanted that. But there's an additional factor, which is a great nuance of an interest. They actually believed the Jews were important, more than they actually were. Now, this is a curious fact. As you know, the anti-Semites had issued a famous forgery called the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. It was done in 1903 by the Russian Secret Service and issued in Europe, saying that the Jews are conspiring to create a world government and take over the country, take over the world. It was a fantastic piece of fantastic story, pure mythology, wonderful reading. It was meant to be a group of half a dozen Jews, I think, meeting in some cemetery in Prague, and that is where they were doing the planning for taking over the government of the world. So it's a good origin to the United Nations, I would say, in such a place. But the effect of that propaganda, the sustained impact of it, was such that even those who were skeptical in one way or the other were influenced. That somewhere the Jews must be powerful and influential, and we must get them on our side. And what better way than to do this? And of course, all this was pushed by people like Lord Rothschild and so on from Britain, and Justice Brandeis from America. Highly influential people in every respect, highly respected, but it came. So when the German attack came and the British saw that their flank was exposed, they issued the Balfour Declaration, which was a promise that the British would support the creation of a Jewish homeland in Palestine, straightforwardly. And they also said, we'll take care after that there will be no Arab majority there. There will be no Arab self-determination there, as long as the Jews are a minority. Self-determination will be accepted only after the Jews become a majority. That was the Zionist program. They said this explicitly, again and again. People like Herbert Samuel, who was a high commissioner there, and Churchill, who never disappoints, said this in 1921. All of us here would have passed away from the earth, and all our children and our children's children before it is achieved. It meaning Arab self-determination. Well, I think I'm in the generation of his children's children's children, and I'm sure many here are still younger. So, and it's nowhere near being achieved. It'll never happen. The final point is, how would they contain the Arab resistance? This is also had to be built into the strategy. After all, the Arabs are not going to take it lying down. So the British offered Arabs a nationalist present. They said, we'll support your nationalism against the Ottoman Turks. This whole world was under the Ottoman Empire, as you know. So the British said, we will support your nationalist resistance against the Ottomans, and we will give you independence after that. It is one of those poison chalices which the British repeatedly offer. It created the careers of people like Lawrence of Arabia and so on. And after that, the British redeemed their promise in the form of creating a series of monarchies, conservative despotisms, in the Arab world. Already there was Egypt under their control after the 1882 occupation. And now they created Syria very briefly, but they had to hand it over to the French immediately after. But in the Hejaz, they created what later became Saudi Arabia. It was then created as a kingdom under the Sharif of Mecca. And his two sons were placed as kings of Iraq and Transjordan, Faisal and Abdullah. So you had conservative monarchies now strung around the Arab world. it is almost a replica of what the British did in India, or had in India, the princely states. You may be guaranteed that they will be hopelessly dependent on the British. They cannot afford to be democratic. They cannot afford to be a popular nationalist under any circumstances, and therefore they will always toe the British line. And in that they were 100% correct, and it has continued to this day in that fashion. Of course, it's not British now, it's American. And with all this in place, the Jewish homeland was promoted. The British supported the immigration and settlement of Zionists there, and gave them every support, overcame every Arab opposition and riots, 1920, 21, 29, and finally the Great Uprising of 1936 to 39, which they suppressed with a brutality which we are familiar with from our histories of 1857 and Jallianwala Bagh, the same sort and the same level of it. The Arab Palestinian population of that area was reduced by 10%, adult male population, as a result of these brutalities. And it was an immense assistance to the Zionist cause. So all these client monarchies served this purpose very well. Syria alone was under French occupation, that is Syria and Lebanon, and it continued all the way till 1946. Again, no problem there, as far as the Zionists are concerned. So the British knew from their experience in India exactly what to do there. You remember the doctrine of paramountcy lapsing after independence. It is more or less the same here. So the results of that imperial strategy were that in Palestine, the demography shifted dramatically. If at the time of the Balfour Declaration, the population of Palestine was 94% Arab, in 1918 it is already 6% Jewish, 1926, 18%, 1931, 31%, 39, 39%. Still not majority. But in 48, after the war, after the declaration of the State of Israel, and during that, they expelled half the Arab population. So Palestinians in 1949, out of 1.3 million Palestinians, 700,000 were refugees, half the population. They'd all been expelled in what is called the Nakba. Now, if you look at the territorial statistics of this, when the first British partition plan was made in 1937, the Peel Commission plan, only 17% of the territory was meant for the Zionists. Even then, 200,000 Palestinians would have had to be expelled. The 1947 UNSCOP, that is the United Nations Special Committee on Palestine and partition plan, gave 56% for the Jewish state. And it was accepted by the United Nations General Assembly. That is the foundation of, that is the UN grant of land to Israel. Immediately after that, the Arab states invaded Israel, and Israel, of course, effortlessly defeated all of them. And in 1949, Israel was an occupation of 78% of Palestine. So finally, the Palestinians became a minority in their own country, with only 22% of the land as theirs. And even that part is what is now being assaulted in every way possible. So, if these two strategies have worked this way, and the manner in which they were coordinated, we have seen, what did the Arabs do throughout? Why was they not able to put up a better resistance? Well, the Arabs had never developed any unity or nationalism. And to this day they haven't. There's no Arab nationalism specifically, which is a movement which has a prospect of becoming a state or a nation. There isn't any. And they were always divided into states. And they did not even theoretically work out an idea of an Arab nationalism throughout these decades. There were so few theories of what could be an Arab nation and what is the nationalism that they should do. As you remember, all the collapsing European empires, other than the Ottoman, the Habsburg, the German and the Russian, all their subordinate populations worked out their respective nationalisms and their territories and so on, one after the other. In the Ottoman Empire, the Arabs did nothing of the kind. They did not work out any theories of nationalism which are suitable for themselves. What is talked of as Palestinian nationalism in the 1920s is merely the nationalism of a set of notables who conducted the politics of the territory. They were not a popular nationalism. It had not reached that point. So it was just people who were protesting in a confused fashion across the territory. And it took until the 1960s and 70s before the Palestinian Liberation Organization came up, for a popular leader leading a national movement and fighting its way for the liberation of Palestine. And now they have been overtaken by Hamas, which are the popular movements and have popular leaders. Till then they didn't have. You had this bunch of kings, and you had a series of others whom I'll just come to in a moment, army officers and so on, who are not leaders. So it took Palestine so long even to overcome this, by which time Zionism was fully elaborated, perfectly installed, a full state created with all the support of the rest of the developed world. The Arab states in question were Egypt, Syria, Iraq, Transjordan, which is now Jordan. Transjordan because it's across the Jordan River, if you look at the map, east of the Jordan River, and Saudi Arabia to the south. Except for Egypt, all of these were post-war British or French creations. They hadn't existed earlier as nations in any real sense of the term, and certainly no popular movements to create a nation out of it. So when the British and French were given powers by the League of Nations, under the mandate of the League of Nations, and therefore called mandatory powers rather than just colonial powers, Egypt managed the politics of all these states. Britain managed the politics of all these states, and France of Syria and Lebanon. All of them are completely subordinate, all the way until the 1940s or 50s. They had to obey in every way what the British and the French would do. And because they were kings, they were not ready to go in for any kind of popular nationalism. No democracy for them. That is dangerous, because the first thing that would happen is they would lose their job. And therefore they were not interested in Palestinian nationalism either, because Palestinian nationalism would be a popular nationalism, and on top of that it would incur the anger of the British, and therefore they would not touch it. So Palestine is totally ignored by all these states. They're all around it, all Arab states, but all of them ignored it. Egypt, even if it was inclined to do anything of the kind, was helplessly under the British control, and it is demonstrated so crudely in thorough colonial fashion in 1942, when Miles Sampson actually drove tanks through the gates of the Abdin Palace and compelled Farouk to sign on the dotted line to appoint the prime minister. He said, either you appoint him or you abdicate. Farouk was always under threat of abdication. Real independence came only in the 1950s with Najib and Nasser. Till then, there wasn't any. Syria, as I said, 19 to 46 was under France. So again, nothing is going to come from there. Iraq was created in 1921, subordinate to Britain, to play the British role. Transjordan was under Britain, that's true, but King Abdullah there was more keen on grabbing part of Palestine. Therefore, he was quite happy with the partition of Palestine that was proposed by the Peel Commission, and he supported it. So let the Israel, or the Jewish National Home, come up, and he will get the rest of Palestine, was his hope. Does the map indicate it? The Jewish National Home will come up for the north of what is shown as Palestine, and in the south he hoped to expand his territory. Saudi Arabia, Ibn Saud took over the kingdom in 1932, and his main interest was to compete with Abdullah of Transjordan and prevent him from expanding. For that, he worked closely with the British. So in one way or the other, all of them worked with the British and against Palestinian interests. There was nobody at all to support the Palestinians as far as state politics is concerned. So Palestinians are isolated all the way. And the states had no resources really to carry out any war or any such thing on behalf of Palestine. And when they were pushed by their respective populations in 1948 to do so, they failed hopelessly. That's how Israel expanded up to 78% of the territory. But what about Arab nationalism? What kind of nationalism did they have? Here one broad fact stands out. All the great thinkers of the 19th century and the 20th century were preoccupied with the problem of how to regenerate Islam. And if Islam could be regenerated to face European science and rationality, that is a great challenge. All religions face that challenge, not only Islam. Christianity did, Islam did, Hinduism, Buddhism, all of them had to face it. And each one of their histories come up again and again with these debates. So how were they to face the challenge of science and rationality? And all their energies were spent on the renewal of Islam, not on Arab unification. It's not that they were unaware of what the necessity of an Arab unification. What they said is, if Islam is regenerated and united and made powerful once again, the Arab world will automatically rise with it. After all, it is the Arab world which had created Islam. And the link between them was umbilical. Whatever was good for Islam is good for the Arab world. So all their focus went into Islam and how to improve it and unite it and in every way. And with it would come the Arab world and the rest of the Islamic world. So this went on to the extent that only in 1928 did the first sort of popular Islamic movement, the Muslim Brotherhood, was set up by Banna. But even he was more confined. The whole movement was more confined to, devoted to propaganda rather than practical action, as was shown in 1948. They could not do anything whatsoever, but they did a lot in terms of propaganda. And otherwise, if it was going to be a secular nationalism, that occurred only as late as 1940 when the Ba'ath Party was created. And that became effectively politically empowered only in the 1950s under Nasser. So it took a long time, and that had a brief career, the 1950s and 60s, politically. And as you know, it has ended up in failure in Egypt, disaster in Syria and Iraq. These are the places where the Ba'ath Party had some success. And they were the secular nationalists who wished to unite the Arab world on a secular principle and on the basis of a composite nationalism. It is not a small wonder that when the Americans were destroying Iraq under Saddam Hussein, one of their major objectives was what they called de-Baathification. That is, Arab unity was a threat, which, if ever it came up, it almost never did. But to the extent that it could, even on the horizon, that was a possible danger. So when we consider all these, I want to take you through an important comparison with India. It will strike all of us. Why is it that here we have a large, compact land and a people with a very ancient and brilliant history who have one religion and one language, but cannot unite and are permanently subject to the colonial masters, even now, in one way or the other. They're all client states. Why is that they're never independent and never united? India, on the other hand, has multiple religions and God knows how many languages, and we've made a virtue of our diversity. It is our diversity which makes us united, so we claim. How is that India has remained united? Not quite. The British managed to extract Pakistan out of it. But the Republic has remained united and grown from strength to strength. It has not disintegrated. It has not become anybody's client. And it has remained united, and the unity, I think, has grown only stronger. What explains this? I cannot give a total explanation, but I can point out to certain things. As I said, the Arab nationalists and thinkers never thought in terms of an Arab nation. They almost never did. And when it came to thinking of a unity of Islam, they're always diverted to the question of a unity under a caliph or the sultan, not of a secular united nation of the Arabs. It had to be Islamic and under the sultan, because for a long time they were under the sultan, or under a caliph, because the sultan doubled up as a caliph. And these are all the famous names: Khairuddin Pasha, Jamaluddin Al-Afghani, Rashid Rida, all these people, one after the other. On the other hand, India determinedly fashioned a unity from the 1870s, whatever the other differences internally. There were multiple nationalisms within India. All the regional parts of India developed their own nationalisms. You have your Bengali, Gujarati, Marathi, Dravidian, etc., etc. They're all major nationalisms. But there's an umbrella nationalism, an Indian nationalism, over and above it. And it went ahead with it. The two went together. Not so in the Arab case. And when they did speak of a nationalism, it was not an Arab nationalism. It was a nationalism of one of the parts, Egypt or Syria. These are only two places which actually proposed any kind of nationalism of the kind that we can recognize. There was nothing, and of course, in Saudi Arabia, limited amount in Lebanon, which had a distinct role because of its Christian population there, and Iraq, rather more feeble. Palestine never had any nationalism until, as I said, 60s and 70s. So when the Egyptians thought in terms of the renewal of Islam and so on, they also thought of the thought of an Egyptian unification. People like Al-Tatawi or Lufti al-Sayyid and so on. And they went back to their pharaonic past, the way we go back to Indus Valley civilization. You know, we are all derived straight from the Indus Valley, as we claim. 5,000 years of Indian history and so on. That is our standard picture of Indian nationalism. So they did it from the pharaonic past. And the Syrians from the Phoenician past, not the Arab. The Arab was just an add-on, as it were. It is not special to them. So they, as it were, subtracted themselves from Arab nationalism in this way. And all the Egyptian nationalists then developed further and further and finally culminated in the Wafd party in the interwar years. The purely secular Arab nationalism we find only occasionally coming up in Syria, like Bustani, al-Bustani, or Ibrahim al-Yaziji in Egypt, or Najib Azuri. Azuri was interesting for being a purely secular nationalist who wanted a composite nation of the kind we recognize. No problem about religion and so on, don't allow that to intrude. Create a purely Arab nation. But that was so rare and came pretty late. And their first attempt at creating it, as I said, was in 1940. India started in the 1880s itself with the conventional date I'll give, the foundation of the Congress in 1885. The chief promoter of the Arab unity, or chief place from where it all came again and again, was Syria. And when the Syrians proposed these ideas in various ways, it took a peculiar form. Syrians saw themselves as the center of true Arab empires of the past. They're thinking of the caliphates. And it is all emanating from Syria. But a peculiar, what shall I call it, snobbery infected them. They said Syria is the core, and all the others will be incrustations around it. And it will be for the Syrian nationalists to decide who shall be admitted and when they shall be admitted, and whether they should be admitted. So Egypt, well, it's a slightly aside, it's a special case. Those countries west of Egypt, Arabs, but they are pre-national, so not yet time to consider them. Saudi Arabia, a similar case, too early to consider, it's just a tribal society. And then there's Iraq. All right, it can wait a little bit. It reminds me of the European Union, of integration at different speeds, the expression used in Europe. If everybody is to be admitted only as and when Syria decides, you can imagine it'll never happen. Who is going to wait for Syria to do so? You compare it with India. Anybody and everybody within the subcontinent was part of the Indian nation, as far as the Indian nationalists are concerned. Never mind what your level of development was, never mind what your religion was, never mind whether you were a princely state or not, what your political condition was. The Indian nation was, as they defined it, the subcontinent. And the assumption was that when the nation is created, we shall make all the arrangements for dealing with the inequalities. We shall not admit people at various times at different places. So there's something so unrealistic about the whole Syrian plans, one after the other by these thinkers. But of course, these are only schemes by Syrian thinkers, not serious political programs at all. And as I said, finally, when the unification did take place, it was under Nasser, the United Arab Republic, in 1958. But it disintegrated very quickly because Syria felt that it was being used by the Egyptians, and they got out of it. And it was the Egyptians are a bit too hectoring for it all. But there's one extraordinary important difference also worth noting. When the Arabs looked for leadership, and even Rashid Rida and so on said this, they couldn't find any. The traditional leaders are all now useless because they are princes or notables and so on. They have no popular base at all. And there's no popular politician coming up anywhere. In other words, there's no popular mobilization of nationalism taking place in the Arab world. And so what do? They turn to the only organized leadership available, the armed forces. And hence the army officers are seen as the natural leaders of Arab nationalism. And hence people like Nasser and so on, and all the Syrian colonels, one after the other, who carried out coup after coup in the 1950s, are the ones who are seen as the natural leaders. Now, the contrast with India is more than striking. In India, uninterruptedly from the 1880s or even earlier, it is always popular leaders. If there were notables, that they always sought a popular base. But leaders were only popular leaders, down to today. At no point was it a hereditary prince who claimed authority because he had a princely background, and nor was it any member of the military or civilian bureaucracy. At no time. Nobody invited them, and they didn't dare present themselves. It has never happened. Of course, the Indian Army and Civil Service say, oh, that's because of our traditions of apolitical service. Now, that's complete fiction. It's apolitical after independence. Before independence, they were the political masters of India. They ruled India, the ICS and the army, as a governing corporation, as Sardar Panikar said once. And the only one man on top above them was the Governor General, and a politician sent out from England. But the political masters of India were the army and civil service. They were the politicians, very capable politicians, within the limits of politics as understood by them, which is only manipulation and repression. There's nothing more than that. There's no mobilization whatsoever. And after independence, both of them were made apolitical. It's something like magic almost, the fact that it has happened, and we've all taken it for granted. And we've taken it for granted the story that their tradition was apolitical, which is a total historical fiction. They were made apolitical. They were demoted from their political status, which is one reason I think the army is so prejudiced against Nehru. They lost their importance. But besides the leadership, there's one more aspect. Albert Hourani commented again and again that the Arabs are always subservient to the Europeans. They think the Europeans are superior as a civilization, and the Arabs should accommodate themselves to that and aim to become that and become Europeans. And many of them have done, indeed, that very well. And then he made a passing comment. There's no Gandhi there. He made it as a passing comment, and I don't think he's aware of the significance of the comment he made. Let me suggest what the significance was. See, the Arabs always thought of themselves, when they said independence, they meant autonomy. Because foreign policy, strategic policy, everything was in the hands of the British or the French. They accepted that. And they accepted their countries as bases, as military bases for these colonial powers. All that is accepted. So they had a very limited understanding of independence. On the other hand, in India, the one thing the national movement from the 20s onwards was absolutely clear about is independence means total independence, without qualification of any kind. That is why there was so much discussion around even a matter like dominion status. There was a lot of controversy. Nehru bore the flag for that, carried the flag for that, and independence would be total, without any doubt about it, and he chalked out an independent role for India in the world. But above him was Gandhi. Nehru was able to be so independent and think so independently, although he's a very different man from Gandhi, because Gandhi was a completely independent thinker. He is the one who actually worked out a fundamental critique of modern civilization, an independent critique of modern civilization. He wasn't reaching back to traditional India, to the Indian past. He wasn't just a Hindu revivalist or any such nonsense. He wasn't trying to make India a replica of Europe in any sense. He was making a critique of the modern scientific civilization itself, of which Europe is a part and of which India is also going to be a part. So it was a modern critique of a modern civilization. And it was a total critique and a fundamental one. And he believed in the capacity, the possibility of a total human renewal on a scale that only Marx and Nietzsche before him have. The conception is grand. And it was that independence of thought which has percolated down through Nehru to the rest of us. And we treat our independence as completely non-negotiable. But we don't take it for granted. Look what happened in Pakistan. Part of the same country, but something else happened. They are like the Arab world. Client states all the way, one way or the other. And their only leadership are military leaders, not popular leaders. They're not been able to sustain it. So in India, we had a completely different trajectory, despite what seems to be much greater difficulties. The Arab world did not manage. And why it is so, and why it happened to be so, well, I do not have an explanation as such. I can only say, why should it be so? Be thankful that India had it, and let us shed a tear for the Arabs who don't have it. Thank you very much.
Perfect.
In time, huh?
In time as well. Thank you, Madhavan.
61 minutes.
That was perfect. 61 minutes exactly, as promised.
On the dot.
And remarkable, really, truly remarkable. It was. Let me exploit my position first by asking you one question. What about all the Muslim congresses that we saw from the 20s onwards? And I mean, didn't they reflect some form of incipient Arab nationalism? Surely they were more than just Muslim renewal.
Oh, yeah. I must. Is this on?
Yeah. Really.
Okay. Yes, there were a whole lot of such congresses, but as I said, most of these congresses were by Arab and Palestinian notables. One after the other from Jerusalem.
And Indians.
Yes, taken from India also.
The Ali brothers.
The connections with India were remarkably frequent, any number of them. But the thing is, these congresses were, to make a crude comparison, is like the phase of the moderates in the Congress, in our Congress, when they were not yet popularly based, but were notables who were gathering in councils and trying to negotiate a deal, one way or the other, with the British or the French, as the case may be. So a series of congresses did a lot of political activity. The Arab Higher Committee, the Arab Congresses, all these things did certainly take place. And they were always arguing with the British for self-determination and so on, since they were the majority, and had to fight the Yishuv, that is the Jews who were already settled in Palestine, who were in a minority who protested wildly, and they could never make it. So there were these, and they are nationalists. I don't know if they could be called nationalists. I would say they were patriots, more of that kind. There's no defined understanding of nationalism amongst the Palestinians and the Arabs generally. That was their weakness.
Well, thank you. The floor is open for anyone who wants to ask questions. Let's start with the students.
This is Anjali from Gandhi College, University of Delhi. And so my question starts with, as you showed...
There's a mic coming to you.
Take the mic.
Why don't you take the mic?
Hello.
Please repeat Gargi for everyone.
Okay, sir. So this is Anjali from Gandhi College, University of Delhi, and I'm pursuing BA Honours in Political Science, and I'm a third-year graduate here. So, recently we have been studying about V.D. Savarkar, Vinayak Damodar Savarkar, and I found a very much similarity, whatever you spoke about here. And he's also regarded as Indian Zionist here, as a Hindu revivalist. So, sir, what do you think in this current scenario of our country? Do you think this Indian fundamentalism that is coming up, Hindutva that is coming up, and there have been several instances where people from other countries have been judging that, be it in the parliamentary, we have Akhand Bharat's map and everything. So what do you think, is it nominal or is it effective right now?
You see, we are discussing Palestine, not India.
So
I was afraid this might happen.
Sorry, sir.
But I thought I must make the comparisons with India. Now, whether this will happen or not in these ways, I cannot predict or foresee. And therefore, I leave it at that. Many possibilities, of course, in India with Savarkar's line, the way it's going. And the manner in which Indian politics has developed over the past century with Savarkar's ideology in full flow and its opposition. If you contrast a secular nationalism with a Hindu nationalism, the two coexist as opposites and oppositions to each other. And the two have constructed the country together. And I think it can continue. It can, indeed. I would not support Savarkar's politics by any means, but I do not see it disappearing either, under any circumstance. Because India, if it's 80% Hindu, it is exactly how the Zionists think about it. And that is the point. And Jabotinsky's Zionism was for that reason called Jewish fascism, the same as we call it here. Not Jabotinsky, but Savarkar. Yeah, there are overlaps, very similar forms of thinking. And they drew their inspiration from 19th century European nationalism indeed. Theodor Herzl was a European nationalist, pure-blooded. Inspiration was German nationalism. In fact, Herzl's ideal of a human life was that of a Prussian Junker, if you are interested in that in detail. Yes, there would be similarities. But I would request you, let's keep our questions on to Palestine. Of course, comparisons are possible, but let's not divert it completely to India. Not that I'm unwilling to discuss India, but that's not what I come here for. Yeah.
Yes. Everyone wants to ask me about India. You want to? Yes, you okay. There's a mic there.
Thank you. My name is Yogendra Kumar, great admirer of yours, Professor Palat. The question is about Israel. You know, you mentioned about Israel, conception of Israeli state, where Jews are in a majority. But what you see today, as Israel has been configured now, it seems the number of Jewish people in Israel or the territories under their control is actually the same as the number of the Palestinians. So there's an inherent untenability which has actually now, in a way, entered the picture in terms of the political dynamic which is developing there. And the second question is, of course, the entire conceptualization that you mentioned about how Arabs and all the rest of it. What's happened actually is that the Americans moved into Afghanistan.
Sorry?
They moved into Afghanistan.
The Americans.
Then they moved into Iraq. And then Iraq collapsed, and then Afghanistan collapsed. So you find the balance of power shifted so much against that Western conception. So now you see the kind of political dynamic or the military dynamic developing now is basically, in a way, it's working on two axes, so to say.
Against America?
So it seems.
And for? Well, yeah, about the demographic structure, Israeli and Palestinian numbers being equal, it's a perpetual problem for the Zionists that they are not able to multiply at the rate that is required to keep up with the Palestinians. And, it's an old problem. When Hitler wanted to occupy Eastern Europe for Lebensraum, living space, he wanted it for the Germans, but there were no Germans to occupy that space. You might want living space. By the way, Israelis now say they want living space. They use the exactly same terms. And there are not enough people. That is a perpetual problem for the Israelis. And they come up against these contradictions again and again. What do you do with the Palestinians? The Palestinians seem to be multiplying. It's a perpetual problem for many of them that these Muslims have the habit of multiplying rapidly, whereas others don't. And they keep saying it's Muslims. They never say the poor. They say the Muslims, although every sociologist worth his name knows it's the poor who multiply. And, of course, they don't know what to do with the Palestinians when they keep fighting back, except that you engage in a genocide of this order that is now taking place there. There doesn't seem to be any other answer in Israeli Zionist terms as to what to do with this territory. If you leave them there, they're always going to fight back. If you want to put an end to their fight, how will you do it? They don't have a state like Egypt has, like Syria has, which can settle down and strike deals with them. They have to do for them what they claimed for themselves once, an empty land which they can occupy and create a state. They can't. Yeah, you do. This will just go on and on. Finally, it seems to be genocidal in concept. That's all. And as to what is the purpose of American action in these support in this way? Well,
He's talking about the balance of power.
Yeah. It's not Afghanistan and Iraq collapsing so much that Iran by itself has emerged. That is, the Iranian bastion for America has collapsed, and Iran has created itself anew. And that is what Americans have to deal with now, because it is a contest between Iran and Israel, and not the Arab states in Israel. We would have expected it should be the Arab states which should be defending the Arab homeland. But it's Iran which is now attacking. Now, in which way that contest will go is very unpredictable and a bit terrifying to think because of the nature of the Israeli aggressiveness. But America's got the capacity to rein it in. And one of the points I'm curious to understand is, and you might know better than me, why do the Americans have to support Israel so much? You see, the original purpose of having Israel there was the British argument about the Suez Canal, which is now defunct. That's irrelevant any longer because you've got air, you've got other forms of transport and so on, and all the Arab states have been tied up in any case. They're all very reliable clients in any case. So why do you have to support Israel in this sort of murderous fashion? And the answer that seems to keep coming up again and again is, it is the internal politics of America. When Roosevelt was willing to settle the whole issue with two separate states and clear it up, Truman said no. And his argument is, look, it's a matter of internal politics. It's not a matter of Palestinians and Israel. I have to deal with my domestic lobby. And therefore, it goes on. So I do not know how far you can take that. I'm not very too happy with the idea of the Jewish lobby dictating everything. So I'm almost coming near to the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, if I think of it that way. And I don't like conspiracy theories. But certainly American politics is now dictated by so many domestic lobbies. And one of the reasons is America has no challenges in the world. Everybody is a domestic lobby. Everybody goes to Congress and says, now, speak up for me. The Jews are the cleverest and the most capable. So they get their way. I mean, we are doing a lot ourselves. We get our way a lot there, I suppose. But it's lobby after lobby. There is no threat to America, not from Russia, not from China, nobody. So everybody is a lobbyist, and the Jews do it best. And therefore this happens. Seems a bizarre situation, I must say.
But there's an interesting nuance there, because when you were listing how the Zionist arguments worked on the British, for instance, the evangelicals' strategy and so on, most of those arguments still apply to the US. I mean, evangelicals matter.
That's right.
They don't apply anymore in Europe.
Yeah.
And so you see the difference in the way Europe behaves today and the way the US behaves. But I guess as long as it's the US...
You mean the global leader always behaves that way?
Well,
because
I'm
the
not
Europeans
sure
have all become clients themselves.
Yeah, themselves, I don't know.
And America is a global leader. Yeah,
but
perhaps, yes, that's a very valid point, yes.
Thank you. My name's Kamal Malhotra, retired from the United Nations. I have two questions. One is actually going back to the United Nations resolution, 1947-48, where the two-state solution was always fundamental. And you talked about 56-44% in terms of the land, which has come down to 22%, not counting all the illegal settlements. What do you see as the future of the two-state solution? And this whole issue of going back to the 56%, linked to the two-state solution. Second, I mean, I think your analysis on why there's no Arab nationalism is fascinating, but the Muslim Brotherhood that you mentioned in passing, why was the Muslim Brotherhood, or why has the Muslim Brotherhood not been able to essentially link their whole movement to create a nationalism as part of that, which goes beyond the Arab world, because a country like Malaysia, for example, that I know quite well, the Muslim Brotherhood is still very relevant there, right at the top political leadership level. So, thank you.
Thank you. About the two-state solution, I do not see it in the immediate future. See, the series of Israeli governments that have come into power since 1977, the Likud governments, they are the extremists, extreme nationalists, the Jabotinsky children, as it were. And their idea of Eretz Israel is Israel on both sides of the Jordan River, not just where they are. So they are very expansionists, very extreme, and they will not tolerate any idea of an Arab state or a Palestinian state in that territory, always saying that their security is threatened. Their idea is that the whole territory should be completely Jewish and nothing else. At best, earlier on, it might have been tolerated by the Labour Party, and that is still a possibility. But the only party that can impose a solution, is America. There's no other way it can happen. America can pull the strings and can impose a solution. It is entirely possible. But that's the one, as the previous questioner, as I said, America is not doing it for a number of considerations of its own, perhaps for its domestic politics. And there's no other particular politics involved in it, as far as I can see. There's no strategic question which requires Israel be in this fashion, act in this fashion. For the British, at one time, it might have been. But even the British did not tolerate the manner in which Israel was going. They wanted to balance it with the Arabs. But Britain had other calculations, like the Indian Muslim population. They had to keep on their side. Therefore, they had to make sure they had to placate the Arabs against the Zionists at that time. That is why the Zionists attacked the British, and all the terrible terrorist attacks took place in 1940s. But the United States is far above all that. It can impose it if it wishes, but it will not, for reasons that I have just suggested. As for the Muslim Brotherhood, why has it not?
the Muslim Brotherhood, I think, has limited itself to being a very, what should I say? It's so conservative, it appeals to a very limited public. To those whom it appeals, of course, they are strong supporters. But otherwise, it's not appealing to anything more. And Nasser was able to suppress them, effectively, or for a long time. Now, if Nasser can do so, and then they keep the Muslim Brotherhood under control for so long, and subsequently also, it has gone on all the way till now, they periodically show them surface and then are suppressed. It shows that they do not have the roots in the country that can expand further. It has too limited a horizon. It is not. It doesn't have a image of a full nation, which finally has to deal with a secular world in one way or the other. It is not able to do so. So it is limited, but within that limit, it's powerful, but doesn't get beyond it. That happens to many religious and ideological movements.
My name is Ambarish Saxena. I am professor in South Asian University. I have two queries. One, when whole of the Arab world is not coming to the support or to the rescue of Palestinians, why Iran is continuously supporting Hamas and Palestine? And two, do you feel that the conflict is now shifting from Palestine to Lebanon? The kind of the clashes are happening between Israel and Hezbollah.
Yeah. Why the Arabs not helping Palestine? If they're not doing it, why is Iran doing so? Iran is not actually helping Palestine. Iran is competing with Israel. That is its purpose, its motivation. And in fact, Iran is holding back Hezbollah, saying, do not use up all our weapons that we have been giving you uselessly. You must reserve it for a grander purpose. It is a geopolitical contest that is taking place between Iran and Israel. And Palestine is just one of the instruments of it. Nobody is taking up the Palestinian cause. Nobody. Not the Arabs, not the Iranians. Hezbollah is being used against against Israel, as and when the occasion arises, owing to a competition between them. And is the conflict shifting to Lebanon? Yes, it is and is not, because Lebanon, the Hezbollah has been attacking Israel with great regularity. And some 100,000 Israelis have had to evacuate from the border areas. Now, there's a long-standing fight going on here. And as far as I can see, Israeli strategy seems to be expand the war sufficiently and make it as dangerous as possible so as to bring in America. If America is committed, or already America is committed, I do not know how much more commitment you need, but I think they want greater American commitment with firepower. Then Israel can deal with Iran. And for a long time, Iran has been trying to persuade America to attack Iran, and America hasn't been. This is an occasion. They can exploit this occasion to do so.
So you think Iran wants Bibi in power? No, don't answer that.
Yes,
there's a question there.
Yeah. Hello, sir. Thank you for the entire explanation. I'm Kanish Kwich, the founder of Polytechnic of. I had a very small question. As you pointed out in your explanation that it was not until the 60s or 70s where a popular leadership rise in Palestine, aka Yasser Arafat. But right now, again, we are seeing that there is a sort of, leniency towards a militaristic leadership in the current conflict. Is there any scope for a popular leadership to rise again in the future?
Are you suggesting that Hamas is not a popular leadership, that it is a military leadership only?
In some way.
Okay. See, it is not a military leadership in the sense that a regular state military, a general has taken over power in the manner Franco did in Spain or things like that, or in our own neighborhood has happened. It's not that type of military. But as you've seen, all revolutionary movements generate military units out of themselves. The Russian, the Chinese, and of course the Palestinian in this case. So if you have to enter into guerrilla war, as the Hamas has had to do, as the Palestinians have to do, they have to generate military formations. And Hamas has done that. It is a very popular leadership, certainly, that to the extent that the Israelis cannot find the Hamas leadership. The whole of Gaza seems to be Hamas. Every man, woman, and child, it seems. So to that extent, it's very obviously popular. But the popular doesn't exclude the military. But what my comments on the military was that a military leadership that came up in the course of state service, suddenly trying to become popular leaders will be a failure as popular leaders.
I'm afraid last two questions. The lady there, and then the gentleman in blue shirt with specs.
Okay, so how do you explain the disintegration of the PLO?
Sorry,
And,
I can't
How
see
do you
How do you
explain the
explain the
disintegration
disintegration
of
of
the
the
PLO?
PLO and its inability to expand into an Arab nationalism and moving into something like
okay.
Hamas?
The
Behind.
This one.
Oh,
Together. Go ahead.
okay.
the
You
PLO.
want, you want to ask both questions? Are they related?
Let's
And
take
we'll-
them one by one. Huh?
Yeah.
The PLO leadership disintegrated it became too comfortable in power in one sense. As long as Yasser Arafat was there, he managed to carry it on. But he was a very erratic leader. I mean, if you're talking of the quality of leadership, he was a very brave leader. He was a legendary leader, very capable. He mobilized, very popular. But he was very erratic also. And he did not conduct himself in the diplomatic sphere in the manner that was required as a responsible leader. There he went off track. I mean, Rashid Khalidi gives you the great details about it, about on all the negotiations over the various Camp Davids and after Camp David and so on. And thereafter, there were scandal after scandal, financial scandals and so on. Of course, those could have been planted by the Israelis also. I never believe scandals are necessarily as genuine as the media makes it out to be. But if you are trapped in those and your own followers start believing that, then your authority declines. And Yasser Arafat had already been there for sufficiently long for his capacity to decline. I think it was very personal, and therefore it went down. And there was no second-line leadership that took over. And Mahmoud Abbas, of course, is nobody at all. He's just almost an Israeli plant there in every way. So another leadership had to come up, and that is what the Hamas was.
Hello, sir. I'm Arun from CHS JNU. Actually, sir, my question is, when we study the overall periphery of impact of colonial policies, impact of British colonial policies, so Britishers created a Islamic country like Pakistan from India, and the same Britishers were involved in creating this Israel for Jews people. So, I was curious to know who impacted whom, like creation of Pakistan, the ideas, some kind of, when we...
A relationship between Israel and Pakistan.
Because the idea of...
No, I think
like
where
idea.
did the British get the idea?
Well, the British got the idea all the way. If you are going to divide... anybody who's in power knows that you have to divide your enemies. Any normal politician does that. That's standard practice. And the British were doing it all the way in India. They are dividing their opponents, and they're always searching for lines of division within India, and religion is an obvious one, caste is another, and so on and so on. They went about it systematically. But Gandhi outwitted them at every point, and the one he could not was on religion in this particular case, and that's how, and you know what happened. The logic in Palestine was rather different, except that Pakistan and Israel, the strategic logic was the same. It was a strategic advantage to have a Pakistan here as to have Israel there. The only thing is the British hoped that India, after independence, the whole of India would be in the British camp. And that is how they worked out. The British strategic planners in the 1920s and from the 20s to the 40s, when they talked about independence, meant that independent India would be like the Arab independent states. Namely, our strategic policies would be aligned to the British. We would be in some form of defensive alliance with the British. And so-called defense of India would be taken care of by the British. People like Panikkar and Shivshankar and so on thought that way. There are lots of people who thought that the defense of India needs the British. It was Nehru who had the absolutely clear idea about it, that no such nonsense. We are going to do it on our own. So the British, for a long time, thought India would be in their camp, but during the Second World War, they saw that the forthcoming government of India is not going to be, namely Congress. So the logic of Pakistan came up. You create a bastion here, just as you created a bastion there, which will be your strategic base. And that worked. American, yeah. I mean, the British passed over everything to the Americans, including themselves.
Well, I think you'll have to continue this offline. I mean, thank you for this. Thank you for a wonderful talk, rich, full of resonance. Thank you. You can see how everybody approves of what you did.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was truly masterly. Thank you.
Just for 2 minutes.
I hope you publish.
I haven't written it.
It will just take a couple of minutes for me to thank all of you. You know, when I was hearing Professor Madhavan Palat speak just now, this iteration of what's happening in West Asia, you know, the tragedy that began October 7th last year, is continuing in a very, very intense manner even as we speak today. And as our chair, Ambassador Menon, has said, to thank Professor Palat again for an outstanding lecture. I hope he'll write it out for us and we can publish it. But I want to thank the audience, you know, very sort of earnestly, because no phone rang. That's quite remarkable, and not too many people had to make an exit, which also I'd like to thank you, because I think sustaining and nurturing the public lecture and giving it the sanctity and the gravitas is, I think, very desirable in a city like Delhi. So thank you very much. I want to thank our chair, Ambassador Menon, for providing, you know, clear steering this very, very animated kind of evening. And a word of thanks to our students, first of all, for coming forward and sitting here when I requested you at short notice. And you may remember that on social media, when I sent out the invite, I had said that all students who come here this evening would be expected to turn in a 500-word critique of Professor Palat, why you agree or do not agree with him. And I received a few direct messages and some calls through Global Youth, Gargi College, somebody else saying that we are hesitant to come because we are not sure we can give 500 words by midnight. So I had to put out messages saying that I was kidding. It doesn't have to be midnight, but 12 noon tomorrow is fine. And the last word, IIC would be happy, so would our Society for Policy Studies. If you want to continue this in a more intense way with somebody like Professor Palat, we could perhaps consider either doing it in person, because I know it's unfair. I could see many people who were trying to ask a question or make a comment, but we were unable to. We have the 8 o'clock protocol at the IIC. But we could either repeat this in person. Madhavan Palat, I'm selling tickets in black for him to do this again. Or we could do it on Zoom. But I'd request one of you, the younger students, perhaps to come forward and let me know how best. And I'm sure both Ambassador Menon, he's got a deep water table. He talked about engaging with Madhavan when they were in college, and he was the fine arts, right? And they called him Menon. Now, when we were young, we used to have a joke saying that, what do you call an absolutely brilliant Mallu? And it used to be said Menon. And today my challenge is that we have 2 Mallus who are brilliant in their own way, and I don't know whether it's correct to talk about Menons. But to both of them, thank you very much, sir. And we'll do this again, and thanks to all of you.
Thank you. Really good.
Stay back, students. Students, if you can, stay back. We'll have a separate chat.
What are you doing?